Don't eat that dessert. The shout sliced through the polite murmur of the gala like a shard of broken glass. Heads turned 100 conversations dying at once. On the polished marble stage, Evangeline Reed, the formidable CEO of Reed International, froze. Her silver spoon, holding a perfect sphere of glistening mousse, hovered an inch from her lips. Her eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, narrowed, scanning the opulent ballroom until they landed on the source of the disruption. It was a janitor, a man in a plain gray uniform, his face pale and slick with sweat, his eyes wide with a terror that seemed grotesquely out of place amid the champagne and crystal. Two security guards were already moving their black suits a blur against the gold leaf walls. "Get him out of here!" Evangeline's voice was low, a whip crack of controlled fury that carried farther than the janitor's shout. But the janitor, Darian Merrick, fought against the guard's grip, his gaze locked on the dessert. "Please, ma'am, you can't eat that. Just listen to me." His voice was raw, desperate. "It's the glaze. I can smell it." The guards grunted, their professionalism strained as they tried to wrestle him backward without causing a bigger scene. Darian's feet scraped against the floor. "Acacia," he yelled the word tearing from his throat. "It's made with acacia nut oil." A gasp rippled through the crowd, not in understanding, but in scandalized shock at the scene unfolding before them. Adrian Crown, the company's handsome and ever-composed vice president, was instantly at Evangeline's side. He placed a calming hand on her arm, his expression a perfect mask of concern and apology. "Evangeline, I am so sorry. Security will handle this. The man is clearly unwell." Evangeline Reed didn't look at him. Her entire focus was a laser beam fixed on Darian. The spoon in her hand trembled almost imperceptibly. For a fraction of a second, something other than anger flickered in her eyes. Doubt, perhaps even fear, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a wall of glacial authority. "You're fired," she said, her words dropping into the silence like chips of ice. She wasn't speaking to the guards, but directly to Darian. "Get this person out of my sight and make sure he never sets foot in this building again." The finality in her tone was absolute. The guards, now empowered, heaved Darian toward the service exit. He gave one last pleading look at the CEO. "My wife," he started, his voice cracking, but the heavy doors swung shut, cutting him off. The ballroom's atmosphere, momentarily fractured, began to stitch itself back together. Adrian Crown smoothly signaled the orchestra to resume playing. Waiters began to circulate again. He leaned in and spoke softly to Ms. Reed. "A regrettable incident. I'll have a full security review on your desk in the morning. Some people are just unstable." Evangeline Reed set her spoon down, her appetite gone. She stared at the dessert, a beautiful, perfect creation that now seemed monstrous. Unstable, perhaps, but the man's terror had felt real. And that word, acacia, a word so rare, so specific a word that held the power to kill her. She pushed the plate away, a chill creeping up her spine that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. Darian stumbled out into the cold night air, his shoulder aching where a security guard had shoved him against the doorframe. One of the guards, an older man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes that contrasted with his stern face, gave him a look that seemed almost apologetic. Mike Brennan had been head of night security at Reed International for 15 years. He'd seen his share of disturbances, but something about this one felt different. The janitor hadn't been drunk or belligerent, just desperately afraid. "Sorry, buddy. Orders are orders." Mike handed Darian his worn canvas lunch bag that had been left in the staff room. "You might want to clear out your locker tomorrow, during day shift." Darian nodded numbly, taking the bag. The city's noise crashed over him as he walked away, horns blaring, sirens wailing in the distance. He was jobless, humiliated, and all because he had tried to stop a ghost from appearing twice in his life. The smell had hit him the moment the pastry chef wheeled the dessert cart past the alcove he was cleaning. It was faint, almost undetectable, under the cloying sweetness of chocolate and raspberry. But for Darian, it was as loud as a scream. The warm, nutty, slightly floral scent of acacia oil. The scent that had filled the emergency room 5 years ago. The scent of his wife's last breath. He walked for hours, the city lights blurring through the angry tears he refused to let fall. He had lost his job trying to save a woman who wouldn't even listen. A woman who looked at him like he was something she'd scrape off the bottom of her expensive shoes. How was he going to explain this to Ivy? How was he going to afford her next refill of the EpiPens that were her lifeline? The same lifeline he hadn't been able to give his wife in time. When he finally pushed open the door to his small third-floor apartment, the smell of stale air and the day's lingering dinner greeted him. A small lamp was on in the living room, casting a soft glow on a drawing taped to the wall. It was a crayon portrait of him and a little girl with bright, smiling eyes, both holding hands under a lopsided sun. A small figure stirred on the couch, wrapped in a faded quilt. Daddy Ivy's voice was sleepy, her 7-year-old face clouded with concern. "You're late," Darian forced a smile, the muscles in his face feeling stiff and foreign. He crossed the room and knelt by the couch, stroking her hair. "Sorry, sweet pea. Work ran late. Big party tonight. Did they have cake?" His throat tightened. "They had a dessert," he said, his voice quiet, "but it wasn't a good one." Ivy's brow furrowed. She had her mother's eyes full of a deep, knowing sensitivity. "Are you sad, Daddy?" He couldn't lie to her. He just pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the clean, familiar scent of her shampoo. He held her tight, the fierce, protective love for her, a physical ache in his chest. "Just tired, baby girl. Just really, really tired. Some things you never forget. Not when they take everything from you." Those words echoed in Darian's mind as he tucked Ivy back into her own bed. He had failed. He'd lost everything trying to prevent a tragedy. And for what the richest woman in the city now thought he was a lunatic. And he was unemployed. He had no plan, no savings to speak of, just a daughter with a ticking time bomb in her bloodstream, and the haunting memory of a scent he could never forget. He stayed there for a long time, listening to the steady rhythm of his daughter's breathing as she drifted back to sleep. The world outside felt impossibly large and cold. He had never felt more alone. The next afternoon, the knock on his apartment door was so sharp and authoritative, it sounded like it could crack the cheap wood. Darian froze, his mind racing. Was it the landlord demanding the rent he now couldn't pay? Was it someone from his old job delivering a final formal notice? He peered through the peephole and his blood ran cold. Parked on the street below, gleaming under the weak sunlight like a predatory jewel, was a cherry red Ferrari. And standing in the dim, peeling hallway of his rundown apartment building, looking utterly dangerously out of place, was Evangeline Reed. Darian's heart hammered against his ribs. For a wild second, he thought about not opening the door, pretending he wasn't home. But the sheer force of her presence seemed to press through the wood, leaving him no choice. He took a shaky breath, turned the deadbolt, and pulled the door inward. Evangeline Reed stood there, dressed in a sharp, dark gray pantsuit that probably cost more than his car. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant knot, and her face was a mask of cold composure. Her stormy eyes swept over his worn t-shirt and jeans, then past him to the cramped, dim interior of his apartment with a flicker of distaste before locking onto his. "Mr. Merrick," she said. Her voice was the same as it had been at the gala, low-cutting and accustomed to absolute obedience. "May I come in?" It wasn't a question. Darian stepped back numbly, and she glided past him into the small living room. The scent of her expensive perfume, a clean, sharp fragrance like winter air, filled the space, completely overwhelming the familiar smell of his home. She didn't sit. She stood in the center of the worn rug, her posture rigid, turning slowly to survey the room, the crayon drawing on the wall, the pile of Ivy's picture books on the coffee table, the faded quilt still crumpled on the couch. "How did you know?" she asked, her back now to him. Darian's throat was dry. "How did I know what—" She turned her eyes, pinning him to the spot. "Don't play games with me. I don't have the time or the patience for them. You shouted a word in that ballroom last night. Acacia. A word that is not in the general vocabulary. A word that is in fact the primary component of an allergy so rare it affects less than 1/100% of the population. An allergy that is my most closely guarded secret. So I will ask you one more time. How did you know?" Her intensity was suffocating. He saw the suspicion in her eyes, the cold calculation. She thought he was part of a plot, a threat to be neutralized. His own fear was quickly being replaced by a surge of old, familiar grief. It was the smell, he said, his voice raspy. The smell, as she repeated flatly, her expression unchanging. "You smelled a single ingredient in a complex dessert from 50 feet away, in a room filled with perfume and food. You never forget a smell like that." Darian shot back, a raw edge to his voice. "Not when it's the last thing you remember before your world ends." He saw a flicker of something in her gaze, not sympathy, but a sharp analytical curiosity. He pushed past her and went to the small, cluttered shelf beside the TV. He picked up a framed photo and held it out to her. It was a picture of a smiling young woman with bright, kind eyes, her arms slung around a younger, happier version of himself. "My wife, Elena," he said, his voice thick. "5 years ago, we went to a little cafe for our anniversary. They had a new pastry chef. He wanted to be exotic, use rare ingredients. He used acacia nut oil in the frosting of her cupcake." Darian's hand trembled. She went into anaphylactic shock before we even got the check. She was gone by the time the paramedics arrived. He took a breath, the air burning his lungs. "Her allergy was passed down to our daughter, Ivy. So yes, Ms. Reed, I smelled it. It's burned into my memory. When I smell it, I don't just smell nuts. I smell the inside of an ambulance. I smell a hospital waiting room. I smell failure." He set the picture down and then pointed to the small, colorful medical alert bracelet on Ivy's wrist and the crayon drawing on the wall. "That's why I shouted. That's why I got myself fired. Because I couldn't stand by and watch it happen to someone else. Not again." The room fell silent. The only sound was the hum of the old refrigerator from the kitchen. Evangeline Reed stared at the photograph, then at the drawing, and finally back at him. The icy mask on her face had cracked. He could see the barest hint of the woman beneath. A woman who looked shaken, vulnerable. "I see," she said, her voice softer, stripped of its commanding edge. She looked down at her own hands, turning them over, as if seeing them for the first time. "My personal chef, the only one who knew the full extent of my dietary restrictions, was let go 3 years ago after a confidentiality breach. My medical records are sealed by a court order. The guest list for that gala and the menu were personally approved by my vice president, Adrian Crown. The dessert was listed as a Verona chocolate mousse with raspberry coulis. No mention of any nuts, let alone that one." She looked up, and her eyes were filled with a cold, hard clarity. "You didn't just save me from an allergic reaction last night, Mr. Merrick. You saved me from an assassination attempt." Darian stared at her, the pieces clicking into place with sickening certainty. This wasn't about a chef's mistake. It was a deliberate, calculated attack. "I came here to find out if you were a threat," Evangeline continued, her voice regaining its strength. "But it's clear you are something else entirely. You're the only person who saw what was right in front of everyone's faces. My security team is either incompetent or compromised. My inner circle is where the snake is hiding." She took a step closer, her gaze intense. "I am offering you a job not as a janitor. I need someone who can move through my company without being noticed. Someone who is invisible to the people in power. I need you to be my eyes and ears. I need you to help me find the person who tried to murder me." Darian was speechless. "Me? I'm a janitor. What can I do?" "You can listen," she said sharply. "You can watch. People say things in front of the cleaning staff they would never say in the boardroom. They don't see you. That's your advantage. It's the one advantage I don't have." She reached into her jacket and pulled out a checkbook and a pen. "Your daughter Ivy, her medication must be expensive. More than you know," Darian whispered. Evangeline wrote quickly, her pen strokes sharp and decisive. She tore the check out and held it out to him. "This is a signing bonus, $250,000. It should handle her immediate needs. Find the traitor for me, Mr. Merrick, and I will set up a trust that will cover her medical care for the rest of her life. You will never have to worry about the cost of an EpiPen again." Darian looked at the check, then at her face. This was insane. It was dangerous. But he also saw the small hand-drawn picture on his wall, and he felt the crushing weight of his empty bank account. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a lifeline. It was the only way out. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. A faint, mirthless smile touched Evangeline Reed's lips. "First thing tomorrow, my head of security will be fired for last night's breach. You will be reinstated with an apology for the misunderstanding. And then," she said, her eyes turning to Flint, "you will go back to being invisible, and you will find me a snake." The next morning felt surreal. Darian walked through the towering glass doors of Reed International, the same doors he'd been thrown out of less than 36 hours ago, and the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The security guard at the front desk, a man who usually just grunted at him, now watched him with wide, curious eyes. Whispers followed him down the hall toward the staff locker rooms, his name a ghost on the lips of people who'd never bothered to learn it before. His supervisor, a perpetually stressed man named Simmons, pulled him aside before he could even change. Merrick, what in God's name happened? One minute you're on a blacklist that would get you arrested for trespassing. The next I get a call from corporate HR at 600 in the morning telling me you're reinstated with back pay and an official apology for the unfortunate misunderstanding. What did you do? Darian just shook his head, his mind replaying Evangeline Reed's final instructions. Say as little as possible. You were confused. You thought you smelled something spoiled. You overreacted. They have accepted your apology. I just made a mistake, Simmons. Darian mumbled. Guess they decided not to hold it against me. Simmons squinted, clearly not buying it. But the directive from on high was absolute. Whatever. Just keep your head down from now on, will you? You've got the entire building spooked. As Darian pushed his cart onto the executive floor later that day, the atmosphere was even thicker with tension. He was a walking ghost story, but as he emptied trash cans and polished glass walls, he felt a new sharp focus. He wasn't just a janitor anymore. He was a hunter. Just as Mrs. Reed had predicted, the head of security had been summarily fired. The official memo cited a severe lapse in event protocol. The new head of security was a grim-faced woman named Catherine Reeves, who looked like she'd been carved from granite. The message was clear. There were no more second chances. Around noon, a junior executive intercepted him by the elevators. Mr. Merrick, Mr. Crown would like a word with you. Darian's stomach clenched. He followed the executive to the vice president's office, a corner suite with a view that stretched to the horizon. Adrian Crown was standing by the window, looking out at the city he seemed to believe he owned. He turned as Darian entered, a polished, sympathetic smile on his face. It didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were like a reptile's, cold, ancient, and unnervingly still. Darian, please come in. Close the door. Darian did as he was told, his hand feeling clammy on the doorknob. I just wanted to personally apologize for what happened at the gala. Adrian began gesturing to a leather chair that Darian pointedly ignored. It was a high-stress situation and clearly things were mishandled. I'm just glad Ms. Reed is a forgiving woman and that we can put this unfortunate incident behind us. He paused, studying Darian's face. I have to admit, I'm curious. You seem so certain. What was it you thought you smelled? Darian recited the lie that Evangeline had prepared for him. I don't know, sir. The kitchen, sometimes things get left out. I thought maybe some cream in the dessert had turned. I have a daughter with a weak stomach and I guess I panicked. I was out of line. Adrian's smile widened, but it still held no warmth. A father's instinct, commendable in its own way. Well, we are all relieved that everything is back to normal. You may go. Darian nodded and turned to leave, his heart pounding. He felt Adrian's eyes on his back the entire way. It wasn't the gaze of a man who believed his story. It was the voice of a predator sizing up an unexpected anomaly in its territory. That night, Darian's cleaning route took him back to Adrian Crown's office. The building was quiet, the sky outside a deep starless black. He worked methodically, his hands moving on autopilot as his senses screamed with awareness. He emptied the main trash can, finding nothing but coffee cups and discarded printouts. But Evangeline had been specific in her instructions delivered via text from a burner phone she'd had delivered to his apartment. Check the shredder bin and look for anything that doesn't belong. The shredder bin was full. Under company policy, he was supposed to just tie off the bag and send it down for incineration. Tonight, he untied it. He laid the clear bag on the floor, the beam of his small flashlight playing over the confetti of paper. It was hopeless. Then he saw it near the bottom of the bag. Something that wasn't paper. A tiny dark glass vial no bigger than his pinky finger. It was empty. But when he carefully worked it out of the thing and unscrewed the cap, and a ghost of a scent hit him. It was faint, almost completely gone, but it was there. Warm, nutty floral. Acacia. His breath hitched. He quickly screwed the cap back on and slipped the vial into a small evidence bag he'd brought from home. He was retying the shredder bag when he heard a faint ding from down the hall, the private executive elevator. Panic, cold and sharp, seized him. He shoved the bag with the vial deep into the pocket of his coveralls and grabbed his mop, frantically sloshing it back and forth across the floor just as the office door swung open. Adrian Crown stood in the doorway, his briefcase in hand. He stopped short, his eyes narrowing as he took in the scene. Still here, Darian. Working hard, I see. Yes, sir. Darian said, his voice miraculously steady. Just finishing up this floor. Adrian's gaze flickered from Darian to the shredder bin, then back. For a terrifying moment, Darian was sure he knew. He was sure those cold eyes could see the vial burning a hole in his pocket. But Adrian just gave a curt nod. "Well, don't let me keep you," he said, stepping inside and moving toward his desk. "I just forgot a file." Darian nodded, packed up his cart, and walked out of the office, every muscle in his back screaming, expecting a hand to grab his shoulder. But nothing happened. He didn't dare breathe until he was back in the service elevator, the doors sliding shut, plunging him into the safety of humming, fluorescent-lit anonymity. In the solitude of the janitor's closet on the ground floor, he pulled out the burner phone. His fingers trembled as he typed a short, simple message to the number Evangeline had given him. "I found something in his office, a small bottle. I think it's the oil." The reply came back almost instantly. "Do not come to me. Go home. Lock your doors. I will handle it from here." A second message followed. "You're no longer invisible, Darian. Be careful." The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and street lamps smearing across his vision. Evangeline's warning echoed in his head, a cold counterpoint to the pounding of his own heart. "You're no longer invisible." He parked his car 2 blocks away from his apartment, circling the building on foot, scanning alleys and doorways for anyone who didn't belong. The ordinary sounds of the city, a dog barking, music drifting from an open window, now seemed menacing. Inside, he triple-checked the locks on his door and windows. He found Ivy asleep on the couch again, her favorite stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. He gently lifted her into his arms, her small body warm and trusting against his, and carried her to bed. As he tucked her in, he noticed her medical alert bracelet had slipped down her wrist. He carefully tightened it, his fingers tracing the engraved letters. Severe allergy acacia, anaphylaxis risk. He was in over his head. This wasn't a game. He was a janitor caught in a war between billionaires, and the vial in his pocket felt as heavy as a grenade. He sat at his small kitchen table for hours, the vial on the table in front of him, watching the first gray light of dawn creep into the sky. The burner phone buzzed just after 6:01 a.m. It was Evangeline. "We need the vial. It's our only physical evidence. The central library opens at 9 hours. Go to the third-floor nonfiction section, 793.7. There's a hollowed-out book called The Art of Deception. Place the vial inside. Leave immediately. Someone will retrieve it." Her instructions were precise, cold, and left no room for error. She was treating this like a military operation, and he realized with a jolt that for her it probably was. Work was a new kind of hell. Adrian Crown's invisible hand was now pressing down on him. Simmons approached him with an apologetic grimace. "Corporate just changed the cleaning rotations. Merrick, they want one dedicated man for the sub-levels. That's you. Boiler room electrical server maintenance floors in the executive garage. It's dirty work, but the order came straight from the VP's office." Darian understood immediately. Adrian was isolating him, pushing him down into the guts of the building where there were fewer eyes, where he was out of the way. Nor a colder thought surfaced where an accident could happen without witnesses. As he descended into the building's lower levels, Darian felt the weight of the structure above him, tons of glass and steel, and human ambition pressing down. The basement levels were a different world, concrete and pipes and the steady hum of machinery that kept the glittering tower functioning. Down here, there were no mahogany desks or crystal chandeliers, just the raw, honest mechanics of the building. In a way, it felt more honest than the polished artifice of the upper floors. Down here, function mattered more than appearance. A loose valve couldn't hide behind a designer suit and a winning smile. A failing circuit breaker couldn't smooth talk its way out of responsibility. Things either worked or they didn't. He spent the next few hours in the sweltering heat of the boiler room. The roar of the machinery was a deafening wall of sound. Every shadow seemed to move. Every clang of metal made him jump. At 8:45, he cleaned himself up, clocked out for his break, and walked the 6 blocks to the library. The building was a quiet sanctuary of wood polish and old paper. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him as he walked to the nonfiction section, his janitor's uniform making him stand out. He found section 793.7, puzzles and games. His fingers trembled as he scanned the titles. There it was, The Art of Deception. It looked ancient. He pulled it from the shelf and it fell open to a neat, hollowed-out square in the center. He slipped the small, bagged vial inside, closed the book, and slid it back into place. His part was done. He walked out without looking back, the feeling of being watched prickling the back of his neck. Back at the tower, he descended into the cool, silent concrete of the executive garage. It was a cavernous space reserved for the company's elite, filled with silent, gleaming machines that cost more than his apartment building. He was supposed to be sweeping the floors, but he moved slowly, his eyes scanning everything. He was in the far corner near the private service elevator when he saw him, Adrian Crown standing beside his sleek black sedan. But he wasn't alone. He was talking to a man Darian had never seen before. A man who definitely wasn't an executive. He was wiry with a nervous energy, dressed in a nondescript jacket and jeans. He kept glancing around, his eyes darting into the shadows. The man had the look of someone who was used to doing things that shouldn't be seen, a rat comfortable in dark corners. Darian ducked behind a massive concrete pillar, his heart pounding. He couldn't hear their words, only the low, urgent murmur of their voices. He watched as Adrian passed a thick manila envelope to the stranger. The man took it, opened it to check the contents, stacks of cash, and then passed a small, square, insulated box back to Adrian. It looked like a medical cooler, the kind used for transporting lab samples. Adrian placed the box carefully in his trunk, slammed it shut, and said a final sharp word to the man. The stranger nodded quickly and scurried away toward the pedestrian exit, melting back into the city. Adrian got in his car and drove off. Darian waited until the garage was silent again before he stepped out from behind the pillar. An envelope of cash for a medical box. It wasn't proof of anything, not legally, but he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he had just seen the snake meeting its supplier. He hurried to the maintenance access panel near the elevator. As a janitor, he had access to the schematics of the building systems. He knew the tower's infrastructure like he knew the lines on his own hands. Working quickly, he removed the panel and attached a small device to the data cable inside a wireless transmitter Evangeline had given him to monitor network traffic. They don't see us, the people who keep their world running. That's their weakness and our strength. The thought gave him a grim satisfaction as he replaced the panel and gathered his cleaning supplies. That night, after he tucked Ivy in, he almost jumped out of his skin when he heard a soft knock at his door. He crept to the peephole, his hand hovering over his phone, ready to dial 911. It was a young woman in a bike messenger's uniform, holding a small flat package. For Merrick, she asked through the door. He opened it cautiously. She had him sign a screen and then handed him the package before jogging back down the stairs. It wasn't a bomb. It was a tablet, sleek and new. He turned it on. There was only one app on the screen, a secure messaging service. A new message was already waiting. Lab confirmed, concentrated synthesized acacia oil, industrial grade, untraceable. The vial contained enough to cause a fatal reaction in under a minute. This was not a warning. It was a kill shot. Darian sank onto his couch, the tablet feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. A second message appeared. You were right to be suspicious of the garage. I had a theory. The man he met is a disgraced biochemist named Dr. Alpert. He specializes in synthesizing organic compounds off-market. The box you saw was likely a second dose. He's going to try again. We need to know when and how. Darian's mind raced. Adrian wouldn't try the same trick twice. The next attempt would be different, more direct. He typed a reply, his fingers stiff. What do I do? Evangeline's answer was immediate and terrifying. You get closer to him. He's isolating you in the basement. Use it. The server room you now clean is the company's brain. His communications, his schedules, his finances. It all runs through there. Find a way in. I need to know his next move before he makes it. The tablet felt alien in his hands, a sleek piece of forbidden technology that represented a line he never thought he'd cross. Evangeline was asking him to commit a felony. Hacking. Corporate espionage. These were things from movies, not from the life of a man who spent his nights wrestling with trash bags and floor buffers. His first instinct was to refuse to tell her it was too much. He typed, I can't. I'm not a hacker. If I get caught, I'll lose Ivy. The reply was instantaneous, stripped of all sympathy. If he succeeds, we all lose. He tried to kill me with a nut. Do you think a man like that will leave loose ends? A janitor who saw too much. A little girl who could identify him. We are past the point of safe choices, Darian. Her words hit him like a physical blow. He looked at the closed door to Ivy's bedroom and felt a cold dread wash over him. Evangeline was right. They were already tied to this loose ends in Adrian Crown's murderous plan. His invisibility was gone. Safety was an illusion. The next afternoon, the illusion shattered completely. He got a frantic call from the school nurse. Ivy was having a reaction. It wasn't major. She'd traded a cookie at lunch with a new friend whose hands had been dusty with peanut flour from a different snack. It was minor cross-contamination, but it was enough. Her lips were swelling, her breathing shallow. The nurse had already administered her EpiPen. Darian broke every traffic law getting to the school. He burst into the nurse's office to find Ivy pale and shaken, a teacher rubbing her back. The immediate danger was over, but the terror that seized Darian was absolute. It was the same helplessness, the same icy fear he'd felt 5 years ago. This time the EpiPen had worked. But what about next time? What if he was in jail and she was in the foster system and there was no one to double-check the ingredients? He held her in the car on the way home, his hands shaking as he stroked her hair. "I'm okay, Daddy," she whispered, her voice still raspy. "I know, sweet pea," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Daddy's here." That night he picked up the tablet again. His resolve was no longer fragile. It was forged in steel. He sent a single message to Evangeline. "Tell me what to do." The instructions came an hour later, a detailed schematic of the sub-level server farm. The main terminal is in server room 3. Security is biometric, but your janitorial access card has been given a 92-second override window. A gift from a programmer who owes me a favor. It can only be used once. A package will be delivered to you tomorrow. It will contain a data cloning drive disguised as a portable phone charger. It will copy the target directories automatically. You just have to plug it in and get out. The next evening, Darian felt a grim sense of purpose as he descended into the building's cold concrete heart. The phone charger was in his pocket. He spent the first hour of his shift just watching. He mapped the security cameras in his head. He timed the patrol route of the lone guard, a bored-looking man named Henderson, who made a full circuit every 22 minutes. He needed a diversion. 20 minutes into Henderson's next patrol, Darian went into a utility closet and tripped the circuit breaker for the lighting in the west corridor, plunging a 50-yard stretch of the basement into darkness. Then he went back to his cart and kept mopping. 3 minutes later, Henderson's radio crackled. The guard sighed, muttered something under his breath, and began a slow, grudging walk toward the west corridor to check the breaker. It was a 5-minute walk each way, plus the time to fix it. Darian figured he had 15 minutes max. He moved the second Henderson was out of sight. He walked calmly to server room 3, his cart rattling beside him. He swiped his access card. The light on the panel flashed red, then green. Access granted. He pushed the heavy insulated door open and slipped inside. The room was like a futuristic tomb, cold and humming with the sound of a million digital whispers. Rows upon rows of black servers blinked with tiny rhythmic lights. He followed Evangeline's map to Terminal C7. He pulled out the data cloner, his hands slick with sweat. He plugged it into the USB port. A tiny blue light on the device began to pulse slow and steady. It was working. Every hum of the servers, every tick of the industrial clock on the wall sounded like a gunshot. 5 minutes passed. 10. The pulsing blue light was supposed to turn solid green when the clone was complete. It was still pulsing. Darian's eyes darted to the clock. Henderson had been gone for 14 minutes. He heard it then, the scrape of a shoe in the hallway outside. Henderson was coming back early. Darian's blood turned to ice. The light on the drive was still pulsing. He couldn't leave. Not with incomplete data. He flattened himself behind the server rack, his heart trying to beat its way out of his chest. The handle on the server room door turned. Darian held his breath, but the door didn't open. The handle jiggled once, then stopped. On the other side, Henderson grunted in frustration. Access denied. Darian's 92-second window was gone. The guard, assuming the door was just locked as it should be, continued on his way, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Darian sagged against the server rack, his legs trembling. A moment later, the tiny light on the drive turned a solid, beautiful green. He yanked it from the port, slipped it into his pocket, and exited the room, his movements stiff and jerky. He'd gotten away with it. Back in the janitor's closet, he plugged the drive into the secure tablet. Files appeared encrypted and meaningless. Then the decryption program Evangeline had installed began to work its magic. A folder opened, Inside was a copy of Adrian Crown's private cloud sync calendar. Darian scanned the entries, meetings, conference calls, dinner reservations. It all looked normal. Then he saw an entry for the following afternoon, tomorrow. It was a 2-hour block marked with the highest level of privacy. The title of the event made the air in his lungs turn to ice. Finalize Asset Transfer, E-Read Heritage Trust. He stared at the words on the screen. A cold legal phrase that felt more violent than any weapon. Finalize Asset Transfer. It wasn't just a murder plot anymore. It was a complete erasure. Adrian wasn't just planning to kill Evangeline Reed. He was planning to steal her entire history, her legacy, everything her family had ever built. And it was happening tomorrow. Darian's fingers flew across the tablet's keyboard, sending a screenshot of the calendar entry to Evangeline. And his message was blunt. Tomorrow afternoon. What is this? His own phone buzzed a second later. Not the secure tablet, but his personal cell. The caller ID was blocked. He hesitated for only a second before answering. He's not just coming for the company. Evangeline's voice was a low, dangerous whisper, stripped of all its usual composure. It was the sound of a queen watching a barbarian at the gates. The E-Read Heritage Trust is my family's foundation. It controls everything, my personal assets, my shares, my homes. It's a fortress, Darian. To finalize a transfer from that trust, he would need my biometric signature, my private encryption keys in a wet ink signature on an irrevocable power of attorney. He would need to have become me, legally speaking. So he's forged it all. Darian asked, his mind reeling. He must have. He's been planning this for years, piece by piece. But the final transfer, the one that moves the assets offshore, requires a physical authorization, a device, a cryptographic key stored on a hardware drive. It's the one thing that cannot be done remotely. He has to physically connect it to the banking network to give the final command. Her voice hardened. That calendar entry isn't a meeting. It's the moment he plans to plug in that key and bankrupt me. And once I'm worth nothing, I'm just a tragic, unforeseen death. Darian's stomach churned. Where would he keep a key like that? Somewhere close. Somewhere secure, she said. His office. It has to be in his office. He wouldn't risk transporting it until the last possible moment. He's suspicious of me, Evangeline. Darian said, the words coming out in a rush. He almost caught me last night. I can't just walk in there and start searching. You won't have to, she replied, a sharp tactical edge returning to her voice. He's expecting you to be in the basement, so we'll give him a reason to leave his office unguarded. Tomorrow morning at 10:00 a.m., I'm calling an emergency board meeting off-site. I'm going to tell them I'm considering a full merger with our biggest competitor. It will cause a panic. Adrian will have no choice but to attend. He'll want to be there to control the narrative. And while he's gone, Darian finished the terrifying shape of the plan forming in his mind. You will have a 20-minute window, Evangeline confirmed. Find that drive, Darian. It's the only way to stop him. The next morning, Darian felt like he was walking to his own execution. He pushed his cart onto the executive floor at 9:55 a.m., his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The floor was buzzing with an anxious energy. He saw executives hurrying from their offices, their faces grim. Evangeline's bombshell had landed. At 10:02, Adrian Crown strode out of his office, his face a mask of cool authority. But Darian could see the tension in his jaw. He didn't even glance at the janitor mopping the floor as he headed for the elevators. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, Darian's 20-minute clock started. He slipped into Adrian's office. The scent of expensive cologne and ambition hung in the air. Where would a man like Adrian hide the key to his entire conspiracy? Darian's eyes scanned the room. The desk was the obvious place. He moved behind it carefully, trying the drawers. All locked. He looked around, his mind racing. A man like Adrian was arrogant. He would want his prize close. His gaze fell on a heavy leather-bound copy of The Art of War on the bookshelf. It looked too new, the spine uncracked. Darian pulled it from the shelf. It was heavier than it should be. He fumbled with the cover and it fell open. It was a book safe. Inside, nestled in a bed of custom-cut foam, was not a hard drive, but a single ornate, antique-looking skeleton key. It was heavy, made of brass, with a complex tooth-like pattern at the end. It didn't look like it belonged to anything in this modern office. Tucked beside it was a folded piece of paper. Darian unfolded it. It was a receipt from a high-security private vault company dated 2 days ago. Item deposited 1 Pelican case. Item for withdrawal, 1 antique safe deposit key. He didn't have the drive, he had the key to the drive. The asset transfer wasn't happening here. It was happening at a private bank vault somewhere in the city. He pulled out the burner phone to text Evangeline, but before he could, it buzzed in his hand with a new message from her. A message that made his blood run cold. It was a trap. The meeting was a bluff to confirm I was suspicious. He never left the building. He's on his way back to the office. Get out now. Darian's head snapped up. He shoved the key and the receipt into his pocket and bolted for the door, his heart exploding in his chest. He was halfway across the plush carpet when he heard the faint telltale ding of the executive elevator arriving on the floor. He was trapped. There was nowhere to run. The office door handle began to turn. There was no time to think, only to react. Instinct, primal and desperate, took over. As the door swung open, Darian didn't run for the exit Adrian was blocking. He spun around and hurled the heavy brass key with all his might, not at Adrian, but at the enormous floor-to-ceiling window that made up the office's entire back wall. The key struck the reinforced glass with a deafening crack that sounded like a thunderclap. It didn't shatter, but a spiderweb of fractures exploded across the pane, a starburst of shattered crystal with a key embedded at its center. An ear-splitting alarm immediately began to shriek throughout the floor, a high-pitched piercing wail designed for a catastrophic security breach. For a single priceless second, Adrian Crown was frozen in shock. His arrogant smirk wiped from his face, replaced by disbelief as he stared at the ruined window. That second was all Darian needed. Experience beats education every time. 20 years fixing things teaches you how to break them just right when you need to. He sprinted past the stunned VP and out into the corridor, his heart trying to claw its way out of his throat. "Stop him!" Adrian's roar echoed behind him, shaking off the shock. "Security! He's a thief! Seal the floor!" Red lights began to flash along the ceiling, bathing the hallway in a hellish, pulsating glow. Darian ignored the executive elevator and slammed his hand on the button for the service lift, his mind racing. It was too slow. He abandoned it and bolted for the fire stairs, yanking the heavy door open and plunging into the echoing concrete well. He took the stairs 2-3 at a time, his lungs burning. He could hear the heavy thud of security guards' boots on the stairs above him, their shouts echoing down the stairwell. He couldn't outrun them forever. He had to use what he knew. On the 35th floor, he burst out of the stairwell and ran down a short corridor. His old janitor's route burned into his muscle memory. He slipped into a utility closet, the door clicking softly shut behind him, just as 2 guards pounded past in the hallway. He leaned against the door in the cramped darkness, the smell of bleach and old mops filling his lungs as he fought to quiet his ragged breathing. He fumbled for the burner phone, his fingers slick with sweat. He typed a frantic message to Evangeline Have Key. "Vault is Sovereign Trust Bank. He knows they're after me." Trapped. He slid the phone back into his pocket. He had delivered the information. Now he just had to survive. He cracked the closet door open a hair. The corridor was empty for now, but he could hear radios crackling from both ends of the floor. They were setting up a perimeter. He needed to go down, but the stairs were compromised. He scanned the closet shelves of cleaning supplies, a deep sink, and in the corner, a small square metal door marked with a faded lightning bolt symbol. The dumbwaiter. It wasn't for people. It was an old pulley-operated lift used to send documents and supplies between floors before the building was modernized. It was small, dusty, and probably hadn't been used in a decade. It was his only chance. He pried the door open with a grunt. The shaft was dark and smelled of dust and grease. He could hear the cables groaning softly in the darkness. He squeezed himself into the cramped box, pulling the door shut, and blindly fumbled for the down button. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then with a lurch and a deafening screech of metal on metal, the dumbwaiter began its slow, noisy descent. It was a claustrophobic nightmare, the box swaying and groaning with every foot it dropped. He passed floors, seeing the floor numbers through the small, grimy glass window on the door. 433. He was a sitting duck. If they figured this out, they could stop the lift and have him trapped between floors. He was passing the 20th floor when the dumbwaiter shuddered violently and stopped. The lights flickered and died, plunging him into absolute blackness. A voice crackled over the intercom system, a sound so close it felt like it was inside his skull. It was Adrian Crown. Did you really think that would work? Adrian's voice was calm, conversational, but dripping with venomous amusement. This is my building, my security system. I know every wire, every circuit. I just cut the power to your little toy. You're in a metal box hanging 20 stories above the ground. There's nowhere to run. Panic, cold, and absolute threatened to swallow him. He was trapped. Here's what's going to happen. Adrian continued, his voice echoing in the shaft. My men are going to be waiting for you on the ground floor. You're going to give them the key. Then you're going to be arrested for corporate espionage, theft, and vandalism. You'll be buried so deep in the legal system, your daughter will be grown before you ever see the sun again. Or you can make it easier on yourself. Just open the door and drop the key down the shaft. I'll get it, and I'll be more lenient. Perhaps they'll only think you're a common thief. Darian's mind raced. He was dangling in the dark. A pawn in a game he couldn't win, but he still had the key. He still had the one thing Adrian needed. He looked at the small window in the dumbwaiter door. It was grimy, but he could make out the floor number stenciled on the wall outside. 20. He knew this floor. It was the IT department, and directly across the hall from the dumbwaiter shaft was a server maintenance room, a room with its own dedicated high-priority emergency power. He took the handle of his mop from his cart. He'd clung to it out of sheer habit and braced it against the door. He began to push. The old latch was rusted stiff. What are you doing? Adrian's voice crackled again. Don't be a fool. It's over. With a final desperate heave, Darian had put all his weight into the handle. The latch groaned, then snapped with a loud crack. The door swung open into the darkness of the 20th floor hallway. He was out of the box. Security to floor 20. Adrian's voice on the intercom was no longer amused. It was pure cold fury. He's out. Get him. Now Darian scrambled out and ran. He could hear the ding of the main elevators down the hall. They were coming. He didn't have much time. He fumbled in his pocket, not for the key, but for the receipt from the vault. It was his only other piece of leverage. It was his only other hope. The 20th floor hallway was a long, sterile tunnel of flashing red lights. Darian could hear the heavy footfalls of security guards echoing from the east stairwell and the chime of the main elevator arriving at the west end. They were closing in a pincer movement with him in the middle. He ran. His only goal was the server maintenance room he'd spotted earlier. He slammed the door shut behind him, his back hitting the cool metal. He was in a small, cramped room, a chaotic jungle of bundled Ethernet cables, humming power supplies, and racks of spare hardware. There was no other exit. It was a dead end. His mind was a maelstrom of fear. He had the key. He had the receipt, but the information was useless if they caught him. They'd take both items, beat the truth out of him, and the plan would proceed. Adrian would win. Ivy would lose her father. His eyes darted around the room, searching for an answer, a miracle. And then he saw it half hidden behind a rack of obsolete monitors. It was a relic from another era, a brass-rimmed terminal for a pneumatic tube system, a network of pressurized pipes the company had used decades ago to send physical mail and memos throughout the tower. Most of the system had been decommissioned, but this one in the IT nerve center still had a faint green power light glowing on its panel. Did it even work? He didn't have time to second guess. He pulled the key and the vault receipt from his pocket. He needed to send it somewhere Adrian wouldn't think to look, a place that was secure but accessible to only one person. His mind flashed back to a detail he'd noticed on the building directory during his first week of cleaning. Floor 3, Suite 301, the Reed Founders Archive. Evangeline's father's old office, now a corporate museum piece she kept for sentimental reasons. He found an empty canister in the rack, stuffed the key and the receipt inside, and jammed it into the tube. He punched in the destination code for the Archive 301 and slammed his palm on the big red send button. For a sickening moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden powerful hiss of compressed air, the canister shot up into the network of pipes, disappearing into the ceiling. It was gone. Whether it would arrive was anyone's guess. The door to the maintenance room burst open with a deafening crash. Two massive security guards filled the doorway, followed by Adrian Crown. His tailored suit was immaculate, but his face was a mask of pure rage. His cold eyes scanned Darian, then the empty room. Where is it? Adrian's voice was dangerously quiet. Darian stood his ground, his breathing heavy. He raised his empty hands. It's gone. Adrian took a slow step forward, his knuckles white. The key. Where is it, Darian? Somewhere you'll never get it, Darian said, the defiant words tasting like blood and adrenaline. The corporate mask shattered. You think this is a game, Adrian snarled. He nodded to the guards. Take him, not to security, to the sub-basement. The guards seized Darian's arms, their grips like iron vices. They twisted his arms behind his back, forcing him to his knees before hauling him roughly to his feet. This wasn't an arrest. This was an abduction. Meanwhile, miles away in a darkened town car, Evangeline Reed watched the chaos unfold on a multi-screen display connected to her private network. She saw Darian get cornered on the 20th floor. She saw him disappear into the maintenance room. She saw Adrian and his men follow. She gripped the leather seat, her knuckles white, feeling utterly powerless. Darian was about to be taken, and her one piece of evidence was about to be lost forever. Then a small, unexpected notification popped up in the corner of her screen. It was an alert from a system so old she had forgotten it even existed. Pneumatic delivery system canister received at station 301, Reed Founders Archive. Hope, fierce and blinding, surged through her. He had done it. He had gotten the evidence out. She grabbed the secure phone. Get me to the tower. Use the South Service entrance. And get me the Attorney General on the line. Tell him it's happening. Darian barely registered the journey. He was dragged through service corridors, down a grimy freighted elevator that smelled of oil and decay, into the deepest, darkest part of the building. The sub-basement was a damp concrete cavern of pipes and machinery. They threw him into a small, windowless storage cage and slammed the bar door shut. Adrian stood on the other side of the bars, his face illuminated by a single bare bulb overhead. He looked down at Darian, who was slumped on the floor, his shoulder screaming in pain. I have an appointment at 2:00, Darian, Adrian said softly. It's a very important appointment, and I will not miss it. So you are going to tell me where you sent that key. Darian just glared at him, silent. Adrian sighed, a theatrical sound of disappointment. I was hoping you'd be reasonable. I see now that I'll have to provide you with some motivation. He pulled out his personal phone and tapped the screen. He turned it so Darian could see. It was a live video feed, a playground. Darian's blood ran cold. It was Ivy's school. The camera zoomed in on a group of children playing near the swings. He saw Ivy, her bright pink coat, a splash of color, her laughter silent on the screen. A beautiful girl, Adrian murmured, so full of life. He swiped his finger and the video feed changed. It was now from a different camera, showing a sleek black car parked across the street from the school. A man in a dark suit was leaning against it, his arms crossed, his gaze fixed on the playground. His gaze fixed on Ivy. The man in the car is a professional. Adrian said, his voice a venomous whisper. He's very good at his job. He's currently on the phone with me, awaiting my instructions. So you see, the key is no longer just about my future. It's about your daughters. Darian stared at the screen, at his smiling, oblivious daughter and the predator watching her from across the street. The fight went out of him, replaced by a terror so profound it was paralyzing. Now Adrian said, his voice silky smooth. Let's try this again. Where did you send the key? The image on the phone screen stole the air from Darian's lungs. Ivy laughing, pushing a swing higher and higher, completely unaware of the shadow looming over her life. The man in the black car was a monster in waiting, and Adrian Crown held his leash. Everything else fell away, the pain in his shoulder, the cold concrete floor, the plan to stop a billionaire. All that existed was that image. The archive. Darian choked out the words, feeling like sandpaper in his throat. The Founders Archive. 3rd floor. I sent it there. Adrian's lips curved into a triumphant, cruel smile. See, was that so difficult? He glanced at his watch. It was almost 1:00 p.m. You've wasted a lot of my time, Darian. He spoke into his phone. Stand by, but stay put. The girl stays in sight until I have the package in my hand. He hung up and looked back at Darian, his eyes glittering. Let's go. And Darian, you're coming with me just to ensure a smooth transaction. The 2 guards hauled Darian to his feet. They left the sub-basement, taking the service elevator back up into the civilized world. To Darian, it felt like a death march. He had failed. He had given up the only piece of leverage they had, and Ivy was still a pawn in Adrian's game. At the same moment, Evangeline Reed swept through the South Service entrance of the tower, flanked by 2 plainclothes officers from the Attorney General's office. Her face was a mask of cold fury. He has the janitor in the sub-basement, she said into her phone, relaying information from her security contact. And he's threatening the man's daughter. He knows where the key is. We have to assume he's on his way to retrieve it now. The archive is on the third floor. Go now, quietly. I'll meet you there. She moved with a speed and purpose that belied her elegant suit, taking a different, more direct elevator. She knew the building's secrets better than anyone, including Adrian. She arrived on the third floor a full 2 minutes before anyone else, her heels silent on the plush carpet. The Founder's archive was just as she remembered it. Dark wood leather-bound books and a faint smell of her father's cigar smoke that never seemed to fade. She went straight to the pneumatic tube station in the corner. There in the receiving bin was the canister. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The antique brass key felt heavy cold. The vault receipt was tucked beside it. She had it. She had the proof. She turned ready to leave and froze. Through the thick glass of the office door, she saw the elevator ding. The door slid open, revealing Adrian Crown. And beside him, held between two hulking guards, was Darian, his face bruised and pale with terror. Adrian saw her through the glass. His triumphant smile faltered for a second, replaced by a flash of pure rage, but he recovered instantly. He gestured for the guards to open the door. Evangeline, he said, his voice dripping with false cordiality as he stepped into the room. How wonderful of you to join us. You've saved me a trip. Now be a good girl and hand that over. She held the key up, her grip tight. It's over, Adrian. The Attorney General is on his way. His men are already in the building. Adrian laughed, a short, ugly sound. You think that matters right now? He nodded toward Darian. This man has a daughter, a lovely little girl named Ivy. She's at school playing on the swings. And I have a man with a car parked across the street waiting for my call. So you can hand me the key and we can all walk away from this, or you can watch a true tragedy unfold on your evening news. Evangeline's blood ran cold. She looked at Darian, saw the absolute terror in his eyes, and understood. This monster had her checkmated. Her company, her fortune, none of it mattered if a child had to pay the price. Her hands started to lower. Defeat was a bitter taste in her mouth. But Darian, seeing her about to give in, felt something snap inside him. He had been a victim. He had been a pawn. He was done. He wasn't going to let this man use his daughter to win. No, he yelled. In one explosive, desperate movement, he threw his entire body weight sideways, slamming into the guard on his right. The man, caught off guard, stumbled backward, crashing into a tall display case full of her father's crystal awards. The case toppled with a cataclysmic shatter glass and trophies exploding across the floor. It was the chaos Evangeline needed. Adrian was momentarily distracted, his head whipping toward the sound. In that instant, she didn't run. She acted. She lunged forward, not at Adrian, but at the guard still holding Darian's other arm. She brought the heavy brass key up in a tight fist, slamming it hard against the guard's temple. The man grunted, and his grip on Darian loosened. Call it off, Adrian, she screamed, her voice raw with a fury he had never seen. Adrian just snarled, pulling out his phone. You've just made the biggest mistake of your life. He stabbed a number on his screen. Darian scrambled free, grabbing the heaviest, most solid crystal award from the floor. He saw Adrian put the phone to his ear. He saw the cold, murderous intent in his eyes. He wasn't going to give an order. He was going to watch his daughter's life end. A man who builds things knows exactly how to tear them down when he needs to. Just as Adrian's lips parted to speak, the double doors of the archive burst open. It wasn't more of Adrian's men. It was a tactical team of state police in full gear, weapons raised. Drop the phone, Crowning. Commander shouted, hands in the air now. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Adrian looked at the police, then at Evangeline, his face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. He knew he was beaten, but he could still burn the world down with him. He held the phone to his ear. Do it, he whispered into the phone. A single gunshot-like crack echoed through the room, but it didn't come from the police. A small, dark hole appeared in the center of the phone in Adrian's hand, which exploded into a shower of plastic and electronics. He cried out, dropping the shattered device. Standing in the doorway behind the tactical team was Catherine Reeves, the new grim-faced head of security. In her hand was a pistol, a thin wisp of smoke curling from its barrel. She hadn't aimed for him. She had aimed for the phone. The connection was cut. But was it in time? Had the order been heard? Darian's heart stopped. The silence in the room stretched for an eternity, filled only with a terrifying, unanswered question. For a long, silent moment, no one moved. The only sounds were the ragged gasps of Darian's breath and the faint, tiny crackle of the shattered phone on the floor. The question hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Was the order heard? Then the room exploded into methodical action. The tactical team surged forward, forcing a stunned Adrian Crown and his bewildered guards to the ground. The clatter of plastic cuffs echoed off the wood-paneled walls. Adrian didn't struggle. He just knelt on the floor, a strange, empty smile on his face. The look of a king who had lost his kingdom, but had managed to burn it down on his way out. Darian saw none of it. His world had shrunk to a single, terrifying point of focus. He stumbled toward Evangeline, his eyes wild with a frantic, desperate plea. "Ivy," he rasped, his voice breaking. "My daughter, did he?" Evangeline was already holding her own secure phone to her ear, her face pale but her voice a blade of pure command. "Report now." No, she listened, her eyes locked on Darian's. The seconds stretched into an eternity. Darian felt his knees begin to buckle, the weight of his terror too much to bear. Then Evangeline's expression softened, the iron control giving way to a wave of profound relief. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. "They got him, Darian," she said, her voice soft. "My security team, working with local police, had the man under surveillance. The moment the line to Adrian went dead, that was their signal to move in. He never even got the final order. She's safe. Ivy is safe." The words washed over him, and the strength that had held him together through the chase, the threats, and the fear finally dissolved. His legs gave out, and he would have collapsed if not for the two plainclothes officers who caught him, easing him into a chair. He dropped his head into his hands, and a shuddering sob tore through him, a sound of grief, of terror, and of overwhelming, bone-deep relief. He had not failed her. 2 weeks later, the world was a different place. The name Adrian Crown was infamous, the subject of headlines detailing a shocking conspiracy of attempted murder and staggering financial fraud. The evidence against him was irrefutable. The cryptographic key, the vault receipt, and the labyrinth of forged documents in offshore accounts that Darian's initial discovery had helped unravel. Reed International, though shaken, was secure under Evangeline's steady hand. For Darian, life had become quiet. He'd been placed on indefinite paid administrative leave, a ghost in the corporate system. He spent his days with Ivy, taking her to the park, reading her stories, never letting her stray too far from his side. The fear had subsided, but it had left a permanent echo. One crisp autumn afternoon, he heard a familiar, low rumble outside his apartment building. He looked out the window and saw it. The cherry-red Ferrari parked in the exact same spot as before. But this time he felt no fear. He met Evangeline in the hallway. She was dressed more casually in a simple sweater and slacks. The icy armor of the CEO was gone, replaced by a quiet, thoughtful composure. She wasn't carrying a checkbook. She was holding a simple leather-bound portfolio. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, her voice gentle. She opened the portfolio. Inside were not checks, but official notarized legal documents. On the top page, he read the words, "The Ivy Merrick Lifetime Medical Trust." It was an ironclad, fully funded trust, guaranteeing his daughter the best possible medical care for the rest of her life, administered by a board of the nation's top doctors. It was more than a promise. It was a fortress built around his daughter's future. "I can't," he started, his voice thick. "You can," she interrupted softly. "And you will. You earned this, Darian. You saved my life. You saved my company. And you reminded me of something I had long forgotten." "What's that?" he whispered. "That the most valuable assets don't show up on a balance sheet." She closed the portfolio and held it out to him. "I also have another offer. I've created a new position at Reed International, Director of Internal Oversight. A person who answers only to me, who has the authority to look where others don't, to see the things that are hidden in plain sight. It requires a unique perspective." A faint smile touched her lips. "It pays better than a janitor's salary, if you want it." Darian took the portfolio, the weight of it both heavy and incredibly light. He looked at this woman who had once seemed like a distant, untouchable queen, and saw a survivor, a partner, a friend. "I'll think about it," he said, a genuine smile finally reaching his own eyes. The next Saturday was bright and sunny. Darian and Ivy were at the park, the same one he had watched with terror on a video feed. But today, there were no shadows, no black cars. Today there was only the sound of Ivy's laughter as she chased a butterfly across the grass. Evangeline met them there. She wasn't wearing a suit or carrying a briefcase. She was just a woman enjoying a day in the park. She bought them both ice cream, and the three of them sat on a bench watching the city go by. Ivy, with chocolate smeared on her cheek, leaned against Darian and looked up at Evangeline. "Are you Daddy's new boss?" Evangeline smiled a real warm smile that transformed her face. "No, sweetie," she said, reaching out to gently wipe the chocolate from Ivy's cheek. "We're partners." Darian looked at his daughter, safe and happy, and at the woman who had helped make it possible. He knew their lives were forever intertwined, a strange and unlikely family forged in chaos and trust. The world was still full of dangers, but for the first time in a long, long time, he wasn't facing it alone. The quiet janitor had found his voice. The isolated CEO had found her heart. And together they had found that the most powerful protection in the world was simply having someone you could count on. 3 months after Adrian Crown's arrest, Darian Merrick walked through the glass doors of Reed International, not as a janitor, but as the company's new director of internal oversight. His office was on the 42nd floor, with a view that still made him dizzy when he looked down at the city below. The transition had been jarring, from pushing a cleaning cart to having an executive assistant who brought him coffee. The company had been rocked to its foundations by Crown's betrayal. Several board members had resigned in disgrace when their involvement in his conspiracy came to light. Stock prices had plummeted, then gradually stabilized as Evangeline implemented sweeping reforms. But the real change was happening beneath the surface, in the invisible architecture of power that Darian now mapped like a new kind of janitor, one who cleaned house at the highest levels. He still felt like an imposter most days. The expensive suit Evangeline had insisted on buying him felt like a costume. The employees who once looked through him now nodded respectfully when he passed. The executive dining room staff, who had never bothered to learn his name, now greeted him as Mr. Merrick. Only Mike Brennan, the security guard who'd been promoted to deputy head of security, treated him the same as before, with a gruff, genuine respect that acknowledged their shared history in the building's shadows. "You still look like you're waiting for someone to hand you a mop," Mike said one morning as they rode the elevator together. Darian laughed. "Some days I miss it. Things were simpler then." Mike's expression turned serious. "Simpler maybe, but you're doing good work now. People like us, we see things the suits don't. That's worth something." Darian nodded, touched by the older man's words. He still made a point of eating lunch with the maintenance crew at least once a week. Their conversations were a lifeline to reality in a world increasingly cushioned by privilege. His first major project was a complete security overhaul. He worked closely with Catherine Reeves, the head of security, whose quick thinking had saved Ivy's life. Together, they implemented changes that respected the dignity of every employee while closing the vulnerabilities Crown had exploited. "No more treating the cleaning staff like they're invisible," Darian insisted during a contentious meeting with department heads. "If someone's good enough to be trusted inside your office with your trash, they're good enough to be trained properly and treated with respect." Several executives shifted uncomfortably, but Evangeline, seated at the head of the table, nodded in agreement. Her public support sent a clear message throughout the company. The old hierarchies were changing. Darian's days were now filled with meetings and policy reviews, but he made sure to be home by 6 every evening for dinner with Ivy. The trust Evangeline had established meant his daughter now had the best medical care money could buy. Her doctors had developed a comprehensive management plan for her allergy, and for the first time in years, Darian slept without the constant low-grade panic about affording her next EpiPen. Evangeline had become a regular visitor to their modest apartment, though she had offered more than once to help them find a more suitable place. Darian had refused. This was their home, filled with memories of Elena. Besides, he didn't want Ivy growing up with a sense of entitlement. He wanted her to understand the value of work, the dignity of earning your place. It was on one such evening, with Ivy already tucked into bed, that Evangeline arrived with a bottle of wine and a troubled expression. She had traded her usual power suit for jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose around her shoulders. In these moments, away from the corporate battlefield, she seemed almost like a different person, softer, more human. "We need to talk about Crown," she said, pouring them each a glass of wine. "His trial starts next week." Darian felt his stomach tighten. The man's name still had the power to chill him. Crown had been denied bail, deemed both a flight risk and a danger to witnesses. But even from his cell, rumors suggested he was still pulling strings, still had allies on the outside. "The prosecution has a solid case," she continued, swirling the wine in her glass. The physical evidence alone should be enough to put him away for decades. Financial fraud, attempted murder, kidnapping, conspiracy, the list goes on. But his lawyers are among the best in the country. They're going to try to discredit you, paint you as an opportunist who manufactured evidence to gain favor with me. Darian stared at his untouched wine. Let them try. The truth is on our side. Evangeline gave him a look that was both admiring and exasperated. The truth doesn't always win in a courtroom, Darian. These people play by different rules. They'll dig into your past, look for anything they can use against you. They'll try to make the jury see you as a desperate man willing to do anything for money. I was a desperate man, Darian admitted quietly. A desperate father. But I never lied. Not about what mattered. And she reached across the table and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. I know that. And I'll be right there beside you every step of the way. We're in this together. The gesture was small but intimate in a way that made Darian's heart skip. Since that day in the park 3 months ago, something had been growing between them, a connection neither of them had put into words. They were both too scarred, too cautious to rush into anything. But it was there in moments like this, a quiet understanding that went beyond their shared trauma. The trial's going to be hard on Ivy, he said gently, withdrawing his hand. She's been through so much already. Evangeline nodded. I've been thinking about that. I have a lake house upstate. It's peaceful, secure. Maybe she could stay there with my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, during the worst of it. She's wonderful with children. Darian considered the offer. The idea of sending Ivy away even temporarily made his chest ache. But the thought of her sitting in a courtroom, listening to Crown's threats being recounted, was worse. I'll talk to her about it, see how she feels. They spent the rest of the evening reviewing trial strategies, their heads bent together over legal documents spread across his small kitchen table. It was well past midnight when Evangeline finally gathered her things to leave. At the door, she paused. Be careful, Darian. Crown may be in jail, but his money isn't. His network isn't. Watch your back. He nodded, suddenly aware of the weight of what lay ahead. We'll get through this. She looked at him for a long moment, something unspoken in her eyes. Then she leaned forward and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his cheek. Yes, we will. After she left, Darian stood at the window, watching her Ferrari pull away from the curb. His hand absently touched the spot where her lips had been. The gesture had been so natural, so unplanned, it made his heart ache with a feeling he had almost forgotten hope. The morning of the trial dawned cold and clear. Darian dressed carefully in his best suit, checking on a sleeping Ivy before he left. She would be leaving for Evangeline's lake house later that day, accompanied by Mrs. Chen and a security detail Evangeline had insisted upon. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras. Darian kept his head down, following his lawyer's advice to make no comments. Inside, the courtroom was already filling with spectators, legal teams, and the strange circus atmosphere that high-profile cases seemed to generate. Evangeline was already seated in the front row behind the prosecution table. She wore a conservative navy suit, her hair pulled back in its usual severe knot. Her public face was firmly in place, the formidable CEO, rather than the woman who had kissed his cheek in his dimly lit hallway. But when their eyes met, he saw the warmth there, a silent message of support. The bailiff called the court to order, and Adrian Crown was led in. Darian's breath caught in his throat. Despite 3 months in custody, Crown looked immaculate in a tailored suit that probably cost more than Darian's monthly salary. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his posture erect and confident. But his eyes, those cold reptilian eyes, were unchanged. When they swept over Darian, they held the same predatory calculation they had in the sub-basement. The trial began with opening statements. The prosecutor laid out the case methodically, the attempted poisoning, the financial fraud, the threats against Darian and Ivy. Crown's defense team countered with a narrative of their own, a misunderstanding blown out of proportion, a janitor looking for a payday, a CEO paranoid about imagined threats. When Darian was called to testify, he felt a moment of panic. The witness stand seemed a million miles away. But as he walked forward, he caught Evangeline's eye again. She gave him an almost imperceptible nod. He could do this. He had faced worse than a courtroom full of strangers. He swore to tell the truth, then sat hands clasped to keep them from trembling. The prosecutor approached first, guiding him through his testimony with practiced ease. Darian spoke clearly, describing that night at the gala, the distinctive smell of acacia oil, his history with the deadly allergen. He recounted finding the vial in Crown's shredder, witnessing the exchange in the garage, his capture, and Crown's threats against Ivy. Throughout his testimony, he was conscious of Crown's unwavering stare. It was like being watched by something ancient and cold-blooded, something that didn't think in human terms. When the defense attorney rose for cross-examination, Darian braced himself. Mr. Merrick, the lawyer began, his voice deceptively friendly. You've had quite a remarkable change in fortune these past few months, haven't you? From janitor to executive in one dramatic leap. Darian kept his voice steady. I was given an opportunity based on my actions, yes. A very lucrative opportunity. The lawyer smiled. A six-figure salary, a trust fund for your daughter worth millions, a position of influence with one of the wealthiest women in America. All because you claimed to smell something in a dessert from 50 feet away. It wasn't a claim. It was the truth. The lawyer's smile turned condescending. Mr. Merrick, isn't it more accurate to say you saw an opportunity that night, a way to exploit Ms. Reed's well-known generosity? Perhaps you'd heard rumors about her allergy and decided to create a dramatic scene. Objection, the prosecutor called. Speculative and inflammatory. Sustained, the judge said sharply. Counsel, confine yourself to questions, not narratives. The defense attorney nodded smoothly. Mr. Merrick, prior to that night, had you ever met Ms. Reed? Num? Had you ever had any interactions with Mr. Crown? Num? So you had no personal knowledge of any conflict between them? No reason to suspect Mr. Crown of plotting against Ms. Reed? No, but thank you. That's all I needed to know. The attorney cut him off before he could explain. Now, regarding this alleged vial you found in Mr. Crown's shredder, convenient that it's no longer available for testing, isn't it? The prosecution has the lab results, Darian said firmly. Yes, from a lab chosen and paid for by Ms. Reed. Tell me, Mr. Merrick, did anyone else see this vial before you allegedly turned it over to Ms. Reed? No, but... And this supposed meeting in the garage. No surveillance footage exists to corroborate your story. Just your word against Mr. Crown's. The cameras in that section were disabled that day. Darian said, his frustration growing. That fact is in evidence. How convenient. The attorney's voice dripped with skepticism. One last question, Mr. Merrick. You claim Mr. Crown threatened your daughter from the sub-basement. Can you explain how he managed to have a video of her school when the building's cell reception doesn't extend to that level? Darian froze. It was a detail he had never considered. How had Crown gotten that video feed? He glanced at Evangeline, whose face had gone very still. I don't know, he admitted, but I saw it. He showed me Ivy on his phone. He showed me a man watching her. Thank you, Mr. Merrick. No further questions. As Darian stepped down from the witness stand, he felt shaken. The defense had skillfully planted seeds of doubt, making his honest testimony sound calculated and suspicious. He returned to his seat beside Evangeline, who subtly pressed her shoulder against his in silent solidarity. The rest of the day was a parade of technical witnesses, financial experts detailing the elaborate fraud Crown had attempted, security personnel from the building, forensic analysts who had examined the evidence. By the time court adjourned for the day, Darian was exhausted, his head pounding with tension. Outside, Evangeline guided him quickly through the press gauntlet to her waiting car. Once inside, with the privacy screen raised between them and the driver, she finally spoke. You did well today, she said softly. Don't let them get to you. This is exactly what I warned you about. They can't attack the evidence, so they're attacking you. That question about the video, though, Darian said, rubbing his temples. How did he have reception down there? Evangeline was quiet for a moment. There are ways. Signal boosters, pre-recorded footage. The defense is trying to make you doubt yourself. Don't fall for it. Darian nodded, but the seed of uncertainty had been planted. That night, after checking that Ivy was safely settled at the lake house via video call, he couldn't sleep. He kept replaying his testimony, wondering if he had missed something, if there were details he had forgotten or misremembered. Around 3 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Storage room B14, sub-basement, come alone if you want the truth, 5 a.m. His first instinct was to delete it. It was obviously a trap, but something nagged at him. Storage room B14, that was where Crown had held him captive. How would anyone else know that specific detail? It hadn't been mentioned in the press coverage. He considered calling Evangeline but hesitated. What if this was legitimate? What if there was evidence he had missed? He couldn't risk looking like he was coordinating testimony with her. The defense would have a field day. After an hour of internal debate, he made his decision. He would go, but not unprepared. He dug through his closet until he found an old flip phone from his janitor days. He charged it quickly, then texted Mike Brennan's personal number with his plan. If he didn't text again by 5:30, Mike should alert security. It wasn't perfect, but it was the best he could do on short notice. The Reed International Building looked different at night, the gleaming glass exterior dark and imposing. Darian used his executive access card to enter through a side door, nodding to the night security guard, who recognized him with mild surprise. The sub-basement was as he remembered it, dim-damp, filled with a constant hum of machinery. His footsteps echoed on the concrete floor as he made his way to the storage room B14. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline sharpening his senses. The room was unlocked. He pushed the door open slowly, one hand on the flip phone in his pocket, ready to hit send on his distress message to Mike. The room was dark except for a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, just like the night crown had imprisoned him here. "Hello?" he called, his voice swallowed by the concrete walls. "I'm here." No answer. He stepped further into the room, eyes adjusting to the dim light. There was something on the floor, a manila envelope. He picked it up cautiously. It was unsealed, containing what looked like photographs and a USB drive. He pulled out the photos and his blood ran cold. They were surveillance shots of him and Evangeline entering his apartment building, sitting in her car at the park with Ivy. Some were dated from before Crown's arrest, but others were recent, taken within the last week. Someone had been watching them all along. A sound behind him made him whirl around. The door was swinging shut. He lunged for it, but too late. It closed with a heavy thud, followed by the unmistakable click of a lock engaging. He was trapped. Panic rose in his throat. He pounded on the door, calling for help, but the thick metal deadened his cries. He pulled out the flip phone to text Mike, but there was no signal. The sub-basement was a dead zone, just as the defense attorney had pointed out. How had Crown shown him that video of Ivy? He forced himself to calm down, to think. If someone had gone to the trouble of luring him here and locking him in, they would be back. This wasn't an execution. It was an isolation tactic. He needed to understand why. He turned his attention back to the envelope, pulling out the USB drive. He couldn't access it now, but it clearly contained information someone thought important enough to risk this elaborate setup. He pocketed it carefully, then examined the room more thoroughly. It was then that he noticed something that hadn't been there during his previous captivity, a small air vent near the floor, partially hidden behind an old storage rack. He moved the rack aside and examined the vent. The screws holding the cover in place were loose, as if recently tampered with. Using a coin from his pocket, he removed the screws completely and pulled off the cover. Behind it was not just a ventilation shaft, but what appeared to be a maintenance crawl space, narrow, dusty, but potentially navigable. It hadn't been visible the night Crown held him here because the storage rack had been positioned differently. Experience beats education every time. 20 years fixing things teaches you how to break them just right when you need to. He hesitated only briefly before squeezing his shoulders into the opening. It was a tight fit, but he managed to wriggle his way in. The crawlspace was pitch black, forcing him to feel his way forward on hands and knees. Years of dust coated the metal floor and cobwebs brushed against his face, but he pressed on, driven by determination and the growing certainty that this was his only way out. After what felt like an eternity of blind crawling, his hand met empty air. The passage opened into a larger space, another maintenance area, this one housing electrical panels. A faint emergency light provided just enough illumination for him to see that he was in one of the building's main power distribution rooms. He climbed out of the crawl space, his suit covered in dust and grime, and oriented himself. From here, he should be able to access the service elevator shaft and climb up to the ground floor. It would be dangerous, but possible. As he moved toward the exit, a noise from above caught his attention. Footsteps and voices. Someone was coming. He ducked behind a large circuit breaker panel just as the door opened. Two men entered, engaged in urgent conversation. One was a security guard Darian didn't recognize. The other, to his shock, was Dr. Calvin Alpert, the same man he had seen meeting Crown in the garage months ago. "We need to move quickly," Alpert was saying. "Once they realize Merrick is missing, they'll lock down the building." The false guard nodded. "Are you sure the evidence is enough?" "We only get one shot at this. Trust me," Alpert replied. "The USB contains everything. Financial records, communications, the whole operation. Once Merrick fails to show up for court today, Crown's defense will move for dismissal due to witness tampering. By the time Merrick is found, the damage will be done. The prosecution's case will be in shambles. Darian's mind raced. This was a setup to derail the trial. If he disappeared now, it would look like he had fled, casting doubt on his entire testimony. The defense would suggest he had fabricated evidence and couldn't face cross-examination. The carefully constructed case against Crown would begin to unravel. He needed to get out to get to the courthouse. But first, he needed to understand exactly what was on that USB drive. These men seemed to think it contained evidence against Crown, not against Evangeline, as he had initially feared. As the men moved deeper into the room, checking various panels, Darian seized his opportunity. He slipped from his hiding place and through the door they had left ajar. Once in the corridor, he moved quickly but quietly, using his knowledge of the building's layout to navigate toward a secondary mechanical room where he knew there would be an emergency phone, a hardwired line that wouldn't rely on cell reception. He found the room unlocked, slipped inside, and located the phone mounted on the wall. He dialed Mike's number from memory, praying the older security guard would answer an unknown call. As he checked his watch, 5:47 a.m. Mike picked up on the third ring, his voice gruff with sleep. "Brennan, Mike, it's Darian. Listen carefully. I'm trapped in the sub-basement. Someone lured me here with a text about evidence, then locked me in storage room B14. I got out through a maintenance crawl space, but there are at least 2 men down here looking for me. One of them is Albert Crown's accomplice. They're trying to prevent me from testifying Baudet." "Jesus Christ," Mike muttered. "Are you hurt?" "No, but they have a plan to derail the trial. I need to get out of here and to the courthouse. Can you help me without alerting the entire security team? I don't know who else might be involved." Mike was silent for a moment, thinking. "There's a service exit on the east side of the building. Maintenance dock. It's only monitored by cameras, no guard posted this early. I can loop the feed for 5 minutes, enough time for you to get out. There's a spare key card in the electrical room emergency box. Code is 7294. "Thank you," Darian breathed. "One more thing. Can you call Evangeline? Tell her what's happening, but tell her to go to court as planned. I'll meet her there." "Will do. Be careful, Merrick. These aren't just white-collar criminals you're dealing with." Darian hung up and moved quickly to retrieve the emergency key card. As he navigated the labyrinthine sublevels toward the east service exit, he remained hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. Twice he had to duck into alcoves to avoid patrolling guards, men he didn't recognize, which set off alarm bells in his mind. Crown's reach extended further than they had realized. He reached the service exit just as his watch ticked over to 6:04 a.m. Swiping the keycard, he pushed through the heavy door into the pre-dawn chill. The loading dock was deserted, the delivery trucks not due for another hour. He moved quickly down the ramp and onto the street, keeping to the shadows. His apartment was too far to walk, and he didn't dare risk public transportation where he might be spotted. Instead, he headed for a 24-hour diner 6 blocks away, one he had frequented during his janitor days when working night shifts. The diner was nearly empty at this hour. The waitress, a middle-aged woman named Doris, who had served him countless cups of coffee over the years, did a double-take when she saw him dusty, disheveled, wearing what had once been an expensive suit. "Rough night, honey?" she asked, already pouring him coffee without being asked. You could say that he replied with a weak smile. "Can I use your phone? Mine's not working." She handed him the cordless phone from behind the counter, without question. One of the things he had always appreciated about Doris. She respected the unspoken boundaries of people who worked unusual hours and sometimes needed small kindnesses without explanation. He called a taxi service, arranging for a pickup in 20 minutes. Then, hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug, he finally had a moment to think. The USB drive was burning a hole in his pocket. What exactly had Crown's people planned, and why leave evidence where he could find it? Unless the evidence wasn't meant to incriminate Crown. What if it was manufactured to point to someone else? To Evangeline. It was a classic misdirection. Make him think he had uncovered damning evidence against Crown, ensure it was introduced in court, then reveal it actually implicated Evangeline in some way. The perfect revenge used Darian himself as the instrument of her destruction. He needed to see what was on that drive before it went anywhere near the courthouse. Glancing around the diner, he spotted a laptop being used by a college student in the corner booth. The young man was surrounded by textbooks, clearly pulling an all-nighter for some assignment. Darian approached him cautiously. Excuse me. I know this is an unusual request, but I'm in a bit of an emergency situation. Would you mind if I used your laptop for just a moment? I need to check what's on this USB drive. It's important. The student looked up, taking in Darian's disheveled appearance with mild alarm. I'll give you $100, Darian added, pulling out his wallet. 5 minutes, that's all I need. The student hesitated, then shrugged. Sure, I guess, but I'm backing up my thesis first. Once the backup was complete, Darian inserted the USB drive. A folder opened automatically containing dozens of files, emails, financial records, photographs. He clicked on an email at random, and his suspicions were confirmed. It was an exchange that appeared to be between Evangeline and an offshore bank discussing the transfer of funds to a shell company. The email looked legitimate at first glance with proper headers and signature blocks, but Darian had spent enough time in corporate communications to spot the inconsistencies, slight formatting errors, unusual phrasing. He checked another file, this one a photograph of what appeared to be Evangeline meeting with Dr. Alpert. But the lighting was wrong, the perspective slightly off. It was a sophisticated Photoshop job, but detectable if you knew what to look for. The entire drive was filled with carefully constructed false evidence designed to paint Evangeline as the mastermind behind a financial fraud scheme with Crown as her unwitting fall guy. If introduced in court, it would create exactly the kind of reasonable doubt that could torpedo the prosecution's case. Thank you, Darian said to the student ejecting the drive. You have no idea how much you just helped me. The taxi arrived and Darian directed it to his apartment. He needed to change and get to the courthouse as quickly as possible. The trial was scheduled to resume at 9:00 a.m. It was now 6:30. He had time, but not much. At his apartment, he showered quickly, washing away the dust and grime from the crawl space. As he dressed in his last clean suit, he called Evangeline, relieved when she answered immediately. Darian, where are you? Mike told me what happened. I've been worried sick. I'm okay, he assured her. But we have a problem. Someone planted false evidence, tried to make me think it was incriminating for Crown. But it's actually designed to frame you. They wanted me to bring it to court, thinking I was helping our case. She was silent for a moment, absorbing this. What kind of evidence? Emails, financial records, photos, all forgeries, but sophisticated ones. They show you orchestrating the whole thing using Crown as a patsy. My God, she breathed. This is more elaborate than I thought. Are you sure you're safe now, for the moment? I'm heading to court as soon as I'm dressed. Meet me on the steps at 8:30, I'll be there. Darian, be careful. Crown has more resources than we realized. The call ended and Darian finished dressing with renewed urgency. He considered taking the USB drive to the police, but there wasn't time for a full forensic analysis before court. Besides, he wasn't sure who he could trust at this point. Better to get it directly to the prosecutor. He was about to leave when there was a knock at his door. Instantly alert, he approached, cautiously checking the peephole. It was Mike Brennan, looking tense and disheveled. Darian opened the door, relief washing over him. Mike, thank God. I didn't expect you to come here. Had to make sure you were okay, Mike said, stepping inside. The building's crawling with people I don't recognize. Something big is happening. He looked Darian up and down. You cleaned up. Good. We need to get you to court. I'm almost ready, Darian said, moving to gather his wallet and keys. Just give me a second. He turned his back on Mike, reaching for his coat. It was only a subtle change in the air, a shift in the quality of silence behind him that alerted him. He spun around just in time to see Mike raising a stun gun. Darian reacted instinctively, knocking the weapon aside. It discharged harmlessly into the wall, giving Darian precious seconds to back away, putting the couch between them. Mike, what the hell are you doing? The older man's face was cold now, all pretense of concern gone. Sorry, Merrick. Nothing personal, just business. Understanding dawned with sickening clarity. You're working for Crown. You have been all along. Mike shrugged. The man pays well. A lot better than Reed International's pension plan. Now we can do this the easy way or the hard way. You're coming with me either way. Darian's mind raced. Mike was blocking the only exit. The windows were no help. They were 3 stories up. He needed to stall. So the setup at the building, that was all you? Mike nodded, circling slowly, looking for an opening. Me and a few others. Crown's got people everywhere, Merrick. More than you know. You're just one piece of a much bigger plan. What plan? Darian asked, keeping the couch between them, scanning for anything he could use as a weapon. To take Reed down permanently. The trial is just the beginning. He smiled an ugly twist of his lips. By the end of today, she'll be the one facing charges, not Crown. It won't work. Darian set his hand closing around a heavy crystal paperweight on the side table, a gift from Evangeline. I've seen the fake evidence. It's good, but not good enough. Mike lunged suddenly, trying to grab Darian across the couch. Darian swung the paperweight, connecting with Mike's wrist. The older man howled in pain, dropping the stun gun. Darian vaulted over the couch, scrambling for the weapon, but Mike recovered quickly, tackling him to the floor. They grappled desperately, Mike's greater weight and combat training, giving him an advantage. He pinned Darian down, hands going for his throat. Darian bucked and twisted, fighting for air. With a surge of desperate strength, he managed to knee Mike in the stomach, creating just enough space to slam his forehead into the bridge of the older man's nose. There was a sickening crunch, and Mike reeled back, blood streaming down his face. Darian rolled away, gasping for breath. He scrambled to his feet, grabbing the fallen stun gun. Mike was already recovering, reaching inside his jacket for a real gun, Darian realized with horror. Without hesitation, Darian fired the stun gun. The electrodes hit Mike squarely in the chest. The security guard convulsed, then collapsed to the floor, temporarily incapacitated. Darian didn't waste time. He grabbed zip ties from his toolkit, a habit from his maintenance days, and secured Mike's hands and feet. Then he called 911, reporting an attempted assault and requesting police. By the time the police arrived, Mike was conscious again, but silent, glaring at Darian with cold hatred. The officers took statements, photographed Mike's stun gun and concealed firearm, and finally took him away in handcuffs. Darian gave them a brief account of the situation, mentioning the ongoing trial and the apparent connection to Adrian Crown. It was nearly 8:15 by the time he was able to leave for the courthouse. He took a taxi, his nerves on edge the entire journey. As they approached, he could see the usual media circus on the steps, cameras and reporters clustered like vultures. And there, standing slightly apart from the crowd, was Evangeline. She was scanning the street anxiously, clearly looking for him. The sight of her, composed yet vulnerable, powerful yet human, filled him with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't felt since Elena. He paid the driver and stepped out into the morning sunlight. The moment Evangeline saw him, her face transformed with relief. She moved toward him, meeting him halfway up the steps. "What happened?" she asked quietly, her eyes taking in the bruise forming on his cheek from the fight with Mike. "Mike Brennan was working for Crown all along," he said, keeping his voice low. "He tried to abduct me from my apartment. He's in custody now, but there are others. This goes deeper than we thought." Her expression hardened. "We need to tell the prosecutor immediately. This is witness tampering, obstruction of justice." "We will," he assured her. "But first you should see what's on this drive. They created an elaborate frame-up, making it look like you were behind everything." He handed her the USB drive. "Keep it safe. Don't let it out of your sight." She took it, her fingers brushing his. For a moment they stood there, connected by more than just the physical contact, by shared danger, shared purpose, and something deeper neither of them had yet named. "We should go in," she said finally. "Court will be in session soon." As they turned toward the entrance, a commotion erupted at the street level. Police cars were arriving, lights flashing, but sirens silent. Officers emerged, moving with the coordinated precision of a planned operation. One of them, a woman with a detective's badge, broke away from the group and approached Darian and Evangeline. "Mr. Merrick, Ms. Reed, I'm Detective Sawyer. We need to speak with you immediately. Your attacker this morning, Mike Brennan, has provided some very interesting information in exchange for consideration. We have reason to believe there may be an attempt on your lives during today's proceedings." Darian exchanged a glance with Evangeline. "What kind of attempt?" "We're not sure yet," the detective replied, "but we're taking it seriously. I'd like to place you both under protective custody for the duration of today's session." Evangeline straightened, her CEO authority snapping into place. "We appreciate the concern, detective, but we will not be intimidated into hiding. We'll cooperate fully, but we are going into that courtroom." Detective Sawyer looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Evangeline's expression made her reconsider. "Very well, but you'll accept a security detail and you'll follow our protocols to the letter." Agreed, Darian answered for both of them. As they entered the courthouse flanked by plainclothes officers, Darian felt a strange calm settle over him. They had survived Crown's first attempt on their lives. They had uncovered his conspiracy, escaped his traps, and brought him to justice. Whatever happened in that courtroom today, they would face it together. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with tension. Adrian Crown was already at the defense table, immaculate and composed as ever. But when he saw Darian walk in, not only alive and free, but accompanied by police, a flicker of genuine surprise crossed his face before he could mask it. It was the first time Darian had seen the man's carefully constructed facade crack, and it was deeply satisfying. The prosecution team greeted them with visible relief. Darian handed over the USB drive, quickly explaining its contents and origins. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Martinez, listened intently, then nodded. "This changes things," she said. "We need time to analyze this evidence properly and to incorporate the new charges of witness tampering and attempted abduction. I'm going to request a continuance." As the judge entered and the court was called to order, Darian took his seat beside Evangeline in the front row. She leaned close, her shoulder pressed against his in silent solidarity. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "I want you to know something. Meeting you, it changed everything. Not just because you saved my life, but because you showed me what I'd forgotten. What really matters." He turned to look at her, seeing past the powerful CEO to the woman beneath a woman who had been as lonely in her way as he had been in his. "I know," he said simply. "It changed everything for me, too." The prosecutor rose to address the judge, requesting the continuance and explaining the new developments in the case. The defense objected strenuously, but the evidence of witness tampering was too serious to ignore. The judge granted a 1-week continuance, ordering both sides to prepare arguments regarding the new evidence. As the court adjourned and they prepared to leave under police escort, Darian caught Crown staring at him with cold, calculating eyes. There was hatred there, but also something else, a grudging respect perhaps. Crown had underestimated the janitor, treated him as invisible and therefore harmless. It had been his fatal mistake. Outside, the autumn sun was bright, the air crisp with the promise of winter. Detective Sawyer approached them as they descended the courthouse steps. "We'll need formal statements from both of you," she said, "and we'll maintain the protective detail until we're certain there's no further threat." Evangeline nodded. "Of course. But first I need to check on Ivy. She's at my lake house upstate with my housekeeper." "Actually," Darian interjected, "I'd like to go get her myself. After everything that's happened, I need to see her." Evangeline understood immediately. "Of course. I'll arrange for the helicopter. It's faster than driving." Detective Sawyer raised an eyebrow, but didn't comment on the casual mention of a private helicopter. She simply assigned 2 officers to accompany Darian. 3 hours later, Darian stood on the deck of Evangeline's lake house, watching Ivy chase fallen leaves across the lawn. She was laughing, her cheeks flushed with the pond and the simple joy of childhood. Mrs. Chen, a tiny woman with a formidable presence, stood nearby, keeping a watchful eye while giving the appearance of tending to the garden. The sound of a car on the gravel driveway made Darian turn. The Ferrari was unmistakable, was the woman who emerged from it. Evangeline had changed from her court attire into jeans and a sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked younger, more approachable, more like the woman who had kissed his cheek in his hallway than the CEO who commanded boardrooms. Ivy spotted her immediately. "Evangie," she called, using the nickname she had created. "Come see the fort." "Mrs. Chen helped me build." Evangeline laughed, a sound as clear and bright as the autumn day. She joined Ivy on the lawn, inspecting the leaf and stick creation with appropriate admiration, while Mrs. Chen discreetly retreated to the house. Darian watched them together, a strange fullness in his chest. A year ago, his world had been small and gray, defined by loss, by struggle, by the daily fight to keep his head above water. Now it was expanding in ways he had never imagined possible. Evangeline looked up, catching his eye across the distance. She smiled, a private smile meant only for him, and gestured for him to join them. He walked across the lawn, leaves crunching beneath his feet, toward the 2 people who had transformed his life. In that moment, under the clear blue sky, with the lake shimmering in the distance, Darian Merrick, once invisible, now seen, knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Not as CEO and janitor, not as savior and saved, but as equals, as partners, as family. If you believe stories like this are a kind of light we need in the world, your support means everything. When you like and subscribe, you're doing more than just helping a channel grow. You're really casting a vote for stories that aren't afraid to look at what makes us human. and you're helping that light find someone who might be in the dark. Thank you for lending me your time. It means a lot.